A Tudor noble house sometimes survived, not because the wife defeated the mistress, but because both women quietly stopped fighting each other. In a court where jealousy was expected to erupt into scandal, the Great Hall instead witnessed something far more unsettling: silence where rivalry should have been. Beneath polite greetings and careful ceremony, two women slowly realized that their true enemy was not standing across the room. Tonight, we step into that great hall to uncover how a wife and a mistress formed the most unexpected alliance in Tudor history. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, adjust the pillow to fit your head, maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere, and let's begin this journey together tonight. If someone stepped into the great hall of a Tudor household during an evening gathering, the room would not feel like a private dining space. It would feel like a public stage where authority quietly displayed itself in every direction. Long wooden tables stretched beneath beams, darkened by years of smoke, while candlelight flickered against stone walls and reflected from metal cups and polished plates. Servants moved steadily through the crowd, carrying bread, wine, and roasted meat. Voices filled the chamber. Yet behind the sound of conversation, there was always another presence, the sense that many eyes were watching. The great hall was the most visible space inside a noble household. Meals were held here, but so were negotiations, introductions, celebrations, and quiet confrontations. Anyone entering the room immediately became part of a system of observation. People noticed where a guest sat, how long he lingered near the lord of the house, and which individuals spoke together in lowered voices. Nothing inside the hall truly escaped attention. For the Tudor elite, public appearance mattered almost as much as land or titles. Reputation was performed through behavior, posture, and composure in places exactly like this. A nobleman who laughed too loudly might be judged as careless. A lady who spoke too openly might be whispered about before the night ended. The hall encouraged restraint because everyone knew that what happened here would travel quickly through the corridors of the house. Servants understood this better than anyone. Moving quietly between tables, they saw every expression, every hesitation, every glance exchanged between guests. They heard fragments of conversation that others assumed were private, although they rarely spoke openly about what they noticed. The information they carried could pass silently from kitchen to corridor and from corridor to chamber. In this way, the hall became a center of political awareness within the household. The arrangement of seating revealed hierarchy at a glance. At the raised table sat the lord of the house, surrounded by his closest relatives and most trusted allies. Their elevated position allowed them to look across the entire room. Guests placed farther away understood immediately where they stood in the social order of the evening. This arrangement was not accidental. It reminded everyone present that authority existed not only in documents or titles but also in daily ritual. Sitting near the lord meant recognition. Sitting far away meant distance from influence. The hall quietly displayed these distinctions without requiring anyone to speak them aloud. Clothing also played its role in this careful performance. Noble guests arrived wearing velvet, brocade, and silk dyed in deep colours that reflected wealth and family prestige. Jewellery glittered in the candlelight. Fur-lined sleeves brushed against carved chairs as people moved through the room. These garments were not simply decorations. They signalled prosperity, loyalty, and social position. Every detail contributed to the atmosphere of controlled visibility. A guest might believe he was simply attending a dinner, yet he was also participating in a public display of status and stability. The lord of the household needed the gathering to appear orderly. Visitors needed to demonstrate loyalty or importance. Even silence could carry meaning if it occurred at the wrong moment. The Great Hall, therefore, functioned almost like a living map of influence. Each conversation, Each gesture and each exchange of attention revealed relationships that were rarely recorded in writing. Alliances could strengthen or weaken during a single evening, depending on how individuals interact within the space. For women of the household, the hall carried particular significance. The wife of the lord usually occupied a visible position beside or near her husband. Her presence symbolized continuity and legitimacy. Guests entering the hall expected to see her seated calmly, representing the stability of the household. She embodied the lawful structure of family, inheritance, and respectability. This role required careful composure. The wife could not afford emotional displays. She needed to appear steady, gracious, and dignified even when tensions existed around her. Every movement she made would be interpreted by those watching. Elsewhere in the room, another presence might draw quiet attention. If the household contained a mistress, her position would rarely be formal. She might stand among the ladies gathered along the sides of the hall, or speak quietly with guests who recognized her influence. She did not sit beside the lord in official seating, yet her presence could still alter the atmosphere of the gathering. Observers noticed where the lord looked. They noticed how often he spoke to her. They noticed whether his attention drifted away from the formal table toward the edge of the room. These subtle signals carried meaning in a society that relied heavily on observation. The hall, therefore, held two different kinds of authority at once. One was visible and protected by law. The other moved quietly through personal relationships and shifting emotions. Both could influence the life of the household, yet only one was openly acknowledged. Guests understood the tension, even when no one spoke about it. The music continued to play. Wine continued to circulate. Laughter occasionally rose from the tables. Yet beneath the calm rhythm of the evening, the hall remained a place where reputation could be strengthened or damaged simply through attention. Watching eyes measured everything. In Tudor society, power rarely hid itself behind closed doors. It lived in public spaces where people could observe and interpret its movements. The Great Hall was one of those places. Every gathering inside, it created a moment where authority, ambition, and personal relationships stood under the same light. The Great Hall looked like a place of celebration. Yet it quietly revealed how authority was displayed and judged in front of an entire household. Within this space of constant observation, reputation could rise or fall through the smallest gestures. And in a room where every glance carried meaning, the presence of certain women would soon turn silent attention into something far more complicated. The lawful wife stood at the center of the household in a way that Tudor society recognized immediately. Her authority did not come from charm or personal closeness. It existed because the law placed it there. When a marriage was performed before witnesses and blessed by the church, it created a bond that carried weight far beyond the private lives of two individuals. Marriage in Tudor England was never simply about companionship. It was a legal structure that connected land, lineage, and reputation. Families arranged unions carefully, often after long negotiations over property, alliance, and future inheritance. When the ceremony was complete, the wife entered her husband's household not merely as a companion, but as a recognized pillar of its stability. The church gave marriage its sacred legitimacy. The law gave it practical authority. Together, they created a protection that few other relationships could claim. Because of this recognition, the wife occupied a position that could not easily be ignored. Her presence within the household represented continuity. Guests arriving at the estate expected to see her beside the lord of the house, participating in public gatherings, welcoming visitors, and maintaining the visible dignity of the family. Her role extended far beyond ceremony. The lawful wife also symbolized the future of the family line. In a society where inheritance determined wealth and influence, legitimate children carried enormous importance. Through them, estates would pass, alliances would endure, and the family name would continue into the next generation. This gave the wife a significance that reached beyond her own lifetime. She represented the channel through which lineage flowed. Her children represented the future security of the estate. Without that structure, even powerful households could fall into disputes over property and succession. Inside the Great Hall, this authority was visible in subtle ways. The wife's seat near the lord of the household was not merely a matter of comfort. It was a public signal that the marriage bond remained intact and that the family's future remained secure. Visitors understood the meaning immediately. A stable marriage suggested a stable estate. A stable estate suggested reliable alliances. These impressions mattered greatly in a political culture built on reputation and trust. The wife also held influence within the daily management of the household. Large estates required constant supervision, from organizing servants to overseeing supplies and domestic accounts. While the lord often managed external affairs, such as land agreements or political connections, the wife frequently ensured that the internal life of the estate remained orderly. Servants reported to her regarding domestic matters. Guests approached her when they wished to gain favor within the household. Even small decisions about hospitality or ceremony often passed through her hands. This quiet authority strengthened her position in ways that were not always visible to outsiders. Unlike fleeting attention or personal affection, these responsibilities reinforced her role every day. They placed her at the center of the household's rhythm. Meals, celebrations, and formal gatherings all passed through structures she helped maintain. Clothing and presentation further reinforced this position. The wife's garments reflected not only wealth, but also permanence. Velvet gowns, embroidered sleeves, and carefully arranged jewelry communicated prosperity and respectability to everyone who entered the hall. These visual signals mattered in a society that read meaning through appearance. When guests saw the lawful wife seated with calm confidence beside her husband, they saw more than an individual woman. They saw the structure of family, property, and legitimacy embodied in a single figure. Yet this authority also required discipline. The wife was expected to maintain composure, regardless of personal tensions that might exist within the household. Public gatherings demanded restraint. Anger, jealousy, or humiliation could not easily be expressed without risking damage to the family's reputation. Because of this, the lawful wife learned to master silence. Her power depended not only on legal protection, but also on her ability to preserve the image of stability that surrounded her. Even when circumstances within the household became complicated, her presence in the great hall needed to remain steady and controlled. This composure became part of her authority. It reminded observers that the household remained intact. It reassured allies that the family structure had not fractured. Through law, lineage, and daily responsibility, the wife embodied the formal power that Tudor society openly recognized. She represented the foundation upon which the household's legitimacy rested, a figure whose presence reassured visitors that the estate remained anchored in accepted order. The lawful wife stood at the center of the household because the church and the law had placed her there. Yet, authority built on legality alone did not control every relationship within the Great Hall. And beyond the reach of written contracts, another form of influence was already moving quietly through the household. The mistress rarely appeared in the official structure of a Tudor household, yet her presence could be felt in ways that were difficult to ignore. Unlike her wife, she did not stand beside the authority of law or the church. Her position had no ceremony, no contract, and no written acknowledgement. Still, within the private life of powerful men, she often occupied a space that carried its own form of influence. This influence did not begin in public. It began in private rooms. In Tudor society, many relationships existed outside the formal boundaries of marriage. Noblemen frequently formed attachments that were understood by those around them, even when they were never openly declared. A mistress might live within the household itself, or she might reside nearby under the protection of the man who favored her. In either case, her position depended entirely on personal closeness. She had no official title within the family, Her name did not appear in the records of inheritance. The church offered her no protection. Yet proximity to the lord of the household could grant her a kind of authority that others quickly learned to recognize. This authority moved quietly. It appeared in moments of conversation behind closed doors. A suggestion spoken softly at the end of the evening might influence a decision made the next morning publicly. A change in the lord's mood after a private meeting might alter the direction of a household dispute or a political alliance. Such influence rarely left visible traces. But people within the household noticed it. Servants observed when the lord spent long hours in certain chambers. Advisors recognized when a new opinion suddenly guided their master's decisions. Ladies in the household watched carefully to see which woman received attention during gatherings. In this way, the mistress became part of the household's hidden rhythm. Her power was not structured like the wife's authority. It flowed through emotion, through attention, through moments of personal intimacy that could not be shared with the wider household. This gave her influence that was both powerful and unstable, because affection could change. A nobleman who favored a mistress one season might grow distant the next. New interests, political pressures, or simple boredom could alter the balance overnight. Unlike the lawful wife, whose position rested on legal recognition, the mistress lived entirely within the shifting territory of personal desire. For this reason, her existence often carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. She might receive expensive gifts, fine clothing, and comfortable chambers within the household. Visitors might notice the respect shown to her by certain servants. Yet everyone understood that none of these signs guaranteed permanence. Everything she possessed depended on continued favor. This uncertainty shaped the way others behaved around her. Some members of the household treated her cautiously, recognizing the influence she might hold over the Lord's decisions. Others kept their distance, aware that her position could disappear as quickly as it had appeared. The great hall revealed these tensions in subtle ways. During gatherings, the mistress rarely occupied a formal seat near the center of authority. Instead, she stood or sat among the other women of the household. Yet the direction of the Lord's attention often made her presence impossible to overlook. Observers noticed when his gaze moved across the hall toward her. They noticed when conversations paused briefly as he approached. They noticed the quiet exchanges that took place beyond the center of the room. These small moments created a different form of power within the household. Not official, not secure, but real enough to influence behavior. The mistress, therefore, lived between visibility and invisibility. Everyone knew she existed, yet few spoke openly about her role. The language of Tudor society preferred silence in such matters, even when the reality remained obvious. This silence allowed her influence to operate indirectly. A word spoken in private could travel outward through decisions made later in public. A mood shaped by personal affection might soften a harsh judgment or redirect an argument between advisors. In this sense, her power moved through the man who governed the household's emotional life. But that same closeness also created danger, because when affection faded, the protection surrounding her could vanish just as quietly. Without legal recognition, she possessed no formal claim to remain within the household. Her influence depended entirely on a relationship that could change without warning. Within the carefully ordered world of Tudor society, the mistress represented a different kind of authority, one that emerged not from law, but from intimacy. The mistress held influence that existed outside the structures of the church and the law, sustained only by proximity and personal favor. Yet power built on affection could shift without warning, leaving its holder exposed to sudden change. Within the same household where legality protected one woman, emotional influence was quietly shaping another path of authority. In the public imagination of Tudor society, the wife and the mistress were expected to exist as natural enemies. Their rivalry seemed obvious to observers. One possessed legality and recognition. The other held the unpredictable advantage of personal closeness. The presence of both within the same household appeared almost designed to produce conflict. Many people assume jealousy must dominate every encounter between them. In reality, the situation could become more complicated. The Great Hall remained the place where these tensions were most visible. It was here that guests gathered, where alliances were observed, and where the quiet politics of the household unfolded beneath candlelight and conversation. Every gathering placed the two women within the same carefully watched environment. At first, their awareness of each other often carried the sharp edge of rivalry. The wife might notice where the mistress stood among the other ladies of the household. The mistress might observe the formal authority the wife carried as she greeted visitors beside the lord of the house. Each woman represented something the other did not possess. One held the protection of the law, the other held the influence of affection. These differences made their coexistence tense. A glance across the hall could contain more meaning than words. A delay in greeting or a carefully avoided conversation might reveal hostility that everyone else in the room pretended not to see. The rituals of Tudor politeness required restraint, but the atmosphere of the hall still allowed subtle signs of rivalry to appear. People noticed these moments. Guests who had visited many noble households knew how to read such signals. They understood that tension between women connected to the same man could influence the entire atmosphere of a gathering. Servants, moving quietly between tables. It noticed it as well. Observation was constant in a place like the Great Hall. Yet rivalry did not always remain permanent. Over time, circumstances could change the meaning of these encounters. The longer two women existed within the same household, the more clearly they began to understand the environment surrounding them. They observed the same behavior, the same patterns, and the same shifts in mood from the man whose authority defined their lives. Gradually, a new awareness could emerge. The man at the center of the household was not always predictable. His attention could change quickly. His alliances could shift. His decisions could affect both women in ways neither fully controlled. This realization altered the way each woman viewed the other. Instead of seeing only a rival, she began to see someone who shared the same uncertain position. Both lived within a structure that placed their lives under the influence of the same authority. One might hold legal recognition, while the other possessed personal closeness. Yet neither controlled the stability of the situation completely. Inside the Great Hall, these quiet realizations often appeared through subtle changes. The glance across the room became less hostile. The tension between them softened slightly. Silence replaced the earlier signs of open resentment. To outside observers, nothing dramatic seemed to occur. The hall continued its rituals of dining and conversation. Music played. Servants moved through the crowd, carrying dishes and cups. Yet within that familiar setting, the relationship between the two women could shift in ways almost invisible to others. The wife might begin to recognize that constant hostility only weakened her dignity in the eyes of the household. The mistress might understand that open rivalry could easily be used against her by those eager to remove her influence. Both women had reasons to reconsider their positions. This did not mean they became friends. Affection rarely grew from such complicated circumstances. What emerged instead was something quieter and more practical. Observation replaced jealousy. Caution replaced confrontation. In the silence between them, each woman began to measure the true dangers surrounding the household. These dangers did not always come from each other. Political pressure from rival families could threaten the wife's position. The arrival of a younger or more ambitious companion could threaten the mistress. Advisors might attempt to manipulate the lord's decisions for their own advantage. Gradually, it became possible for both women to recognize a shared reality. Their rivalry was only one part of a much larger system of power. Within the candlelit hall, where every gesture carried meaning, the two women began to look at one another differently. The hostility that once defined their relationship did not vanish, but it no longer dominated every moment. Something else had begun to take its place. A quiet understanding. The glances exchanged across the great hall no longer carried only jealousy and resentment. Silence began to replace open hostility, as both women observed the same unstable world around them. In that quiet space between them, a new realization was beginning to form. The greatest danger inside the household might not be the woman standing across the room. At the center of the household stood a man whose authority seemed unquestionable to anyone entering the great hall. Guests saw him seated beneath banners and candlelight, surrounded by allies, relatives, and servants moving carefully through the room. His presence defined the rhythm of the gathering. When he spoke, the conversation quieted. When he laughed, others joined. From a distance, the structure of power appeared simple and solid. Closer observation often revealed something far less predictable. Authority in Tudor society granted noblemen enormous control over their households. Land, finance, and reputation rested largely in their hands. Decisions that affected dozens of lives could be made within moments. Sometimes, during a single conversation at the dining table or in the privacy of a chamber after the evening gathering had ended. When the lord of a household governed with discipline, life within the estate developed a stable rhythm. Servants understood expectations. Advisors knew when their counsel would be heard. Family members could anticipate his reactions and adjust their behavior accordingly. Yet not every man who held such authority possessed that steadiness. Some were guided less by careful judgment and more by emotion. Their moods could shift with little warning. A generous decision made in the morning might be replaced by irritation by nightfall. A guest welcomed warmly one week might receive only distant politeness the next. Inside the household, these shifts were noticed immediately. Servants were often the first to sense the change. They observed how quickly the lord's temper could move from calm to sharp impatience during the evening meal. A question that seemed harmless might suddenly provoke annoyance. A conversation that began pleasantly could end with abrupt silence. Because servants moved quietly through every room of the house, they understood how unstable moods could influence daily life. Advisors noticed it as well. A lord who changed direction frequently created uncertainty among those responsible for managing estates and alliances. One suggestion might be accepted enthusiastically during a private discussion, only to be dismissed hours later during a public gathering in the hall. Such inconsistency spread unease through the household. For the wife, this instability carried consequences that few guests fully understood. Her position remained protected by law and tradition, yet her daily dignity depended heavily on the behavior of the man beside her. A careless remark spoken in frustration could expose private tensions before the entire hall. A sudden change in his attitude could transform a peaceful evening into an uncomfortable spectacle. Custom prevented her from confronting him openly. The expectations placed upon noble women required composure even in moments of humiliation. Her authority relied on restraint rather than defiance. As a result, she often endured unpredictable moods while preserving the appearance of calm that the household required. The mistress experienced the same instability differently. Her influence depended entirely on his attention. When he favored her, her presence could quietly influence conversations and decisions. A word spoken in private chambers might shape the direction of household affairs the following day. But affection, guided by unstable emotions, rarely remained consistent. The same man who sought her company with enthusiasm might withdraw without explanation. Invitations could disappear. Attention that once seemed constant could fade suddenly when another distraction appeared. This uncertainty placed the mistress in a state of continuous adjustment. She learned to read small changes in tone, expression, and gesture. A brief silence during conversation might carry meaning. A glance across the great hall could reveal whether her presence still mattered in that moment. Both women, therefore, lived under the influence of the same shifting temperament. Yet rivalry between them often concealed this reality. Jealousy encouraged each woman to watch the other carefully, measuring attention and interpreting every gesture as evidence of competition. The wife protected her dignity by maintaining distance. The mistress guarded her influence by remaining attentive to the lord's moods. While they observed each other, the man at the center remained the source of their uncertainty. This arrangement allowed him to maintain control without effort. As long as the rivalry continued, neither woman directed her attention fully toward the deeper instability within the household. Each focused on preserving her own position rather than questioning the behavior that created the tension between them. Guests visiting the estate rarely recognized this complexity. To them, the evening gatherings in the great hall appeared orderly. Music drifted through the chamber. Wine circulated between tables. Conversations unfolded with careful politeness. The lord still occupied the highest seat, and the household continued its rituals as it always had. Yet beneath that appearance of stability existed a quieter truth. Power centered on a man whose emotions did not always remain steady. Every mood influenced the household. Every change in attention altered the delicate balance surrounding him. Both the wife and the mistress felt these changes long before anyone else noticed them. Gradually, this shared experience revealed something uncomfortable. Their rivalry did not create the instability in which they lived. It merely existed inside a structure already shaped by one man's unpredictable authority. Recognition of this fact did not erase the tension between them. It did, however, begin to redirect their attention toward the same source. The realization emerged slowly, not through confrontation, but through observation. An unstable authority at the center of the household quietly influenced the lives of both women who depended on it. Rivalry between them often distracted attention from the deeper source of uncertainty. That understanding began to change how each woman viewed the other across the great hall. Power inside a Tudor household appeared stable from the outside. Guests who entered the great hall saw a nobleman seated in authority, a wife beside him, representing lawful order, and a household functioning with practiced discipline. The rituals of dining, greeting visitors, and managing servants created the impression of harmony. Beneath this appearance, however, the authority of the man who ruled the household could become a source of danger for everyone around him. Control in Tudor society rested heavily in male hands. A nobleman possessed the right to govern his estate, to command his servants, and shape the reputation of his family. His voice carried weight not only within the walls of his house, but also across alliances with other families and political figures. This authority granted him enormous influence. It also allowed him to create instability when it suited his interests. A powerful man could withdraw favor without warning. A marriage protected by law still depended on the husband's willingness to preserve its dignity. A mistress who enjoyed his affection could find that affection removed overnight. In both situations, the women connected to him discovered how fragile their positions could become when his attention shifted. Abandonment did not always arrive in dramatic form. Sometimes it appeared quietly. A husband might reduce his wife's presence in public gatherings, allowing rumors to circulate that she had lost influence within the household. He might distance himself from the mistress without openly dismissing her, leaving her suspended in uncertainty while servants and guests whispered about her fading position. Silence often proved more effective than confrontation. By withholding attention, the man at the center of the household could reshape relationships without speaking directly about them. This created an atmosphere in which both women remained uncertain about their security. Fear became part of the structure. For the wife, the danger often involved reputation. Although the law recognized her position, a husband could damage her dignity through public humiliation or carefully spread rumors. A careless accusation or an ambiguous remark made before witnesses could place her in a difficult position. Defending herself openly might appear disrespectful, yet remaining silent allowed speculation to grow. The mistress faced a different form of vulnerability. Her influence depended entirely on the continuation of private favor. Without legal recognition, she possessed no claim to remain within the household if the man chose to withdraw his support. Even the smallest hint that his attention had shifted could encourage servants and visitors to treat her differently. Respect could disappear quickly when protection weakened. In this way, authority, rooted in male power, created tension that extended through the entire household. Servants watched the changing behavior of their master carefully, adjusting their loyalty to whoever appeared safest to serve. Advisors listened for signals that alliances within the family might shift. Every person in the household learned to read the mood of the man whose authority governed them. For the wife and the mistress, this shared environment produced a strange reality. Although their positions differed greatly, both lived under the influence of the same unpredictable force. One possessed legality but could still suffer public humiliation. The other possessed closeness but could lose everything without warning. Both understood that the man who controlled their lives could use reputation and silence as tools of control, allowing rumors to circulate, withholding approval, or altering attention in public gatherings created a subtle but powerful pressure. This pressure maintained his authority. Fear of losing position encouraged obedience. Uncertainty prevented resistance. Inside the Great Hall, these dynamics remained largely invisible to visitors who saw only ceremony and polite conversation. The household continued to function. Meals continued to be served, and guests continued to observe the rituals of noble life. Yet beneath that orderly surface, the structure of power depended on tension, carefully maintained by the man at its center. For the wife and the mistress, recognizing this pattern could change how they viewed one another. The rivalry between them did not create the instability they lived with. It merely existed within it. Male authority inside the household carried the power to protect or destroy the lives surrounding it. Both the wife and the mistress learned that favor could disappear and reputation could be manipulated without warning. This realization slowly revealed that the true source of danger might not stand between them at all. Life inside a Tudor household rarely existed in isolation. Behind every gathering in the Great Hall stood a network of families, alliances, and ambitions that stretched far beyond the walls of the estate. Noble houses watched one another carefully, measuring strength, weakness, and opportunity with quiet patience. Power in Tudor society was never confined to one household alone. Marriage connected families, land connected influence, political ambition connected nearly everyone who held a title. Because of this, the stability of a noble household could attract attention from outside forces eager to reshape it for their own advantage. Rival families understood that influence often began with marriage. A noblewoman, seated beside her husband, represented not only personal union, but also the alliance between two houses. Through her came connections to relatives, inherited claims, and the promise of legitimate heirs. For ambitious rivals, replacing that wife could alter the entire balance of power. Such attempts rarely began with open confrontation. Direct accusations or challenges carried risks that could damage reputations across several families. Instead, pressure usually appeared in quieter forms. Rumors circulated first. A visiting relative might suggest that the marriage had grown strained. A court advisor might hint that the household would benefit from stronger alliances. Conversations at distant estates might include speculation about whether the lord's current marriage truly served his political interests. These whispers travelled slowly but persistently. Guests carried them from one hall to another. Servants repeated fragments of them in kitchens and corridors. By the time such rumours reached the household itself, they often felt like an atmosphere rather than a single accusation. At the same time, another form of pressure could emerge. A new woman might begin to appear in the social circles surrounding the household. She might arrive as a guest of a visiting family or as a companion to a relative. Her presence might appear harmless at first, yet her background often revealed careful planning. Her family might possess land that strengthened political alliances. Her connections might offer access to influence at court. Her youth or charm might attract attention in ways that encourage speculation. When such a figure entered the environment surrounding a household, tension spread quietly among those already living there. For the wife, the danger lay in the possibility of replacement. Although Tudor law made divorce difficult, history still contained examples of marriages dissolved or pushed aside for political reasons. Powerful men sometimes pursued annulments through legal arguments or ecclesiastical courts when they believed another alliance would strengthen their position. Even the suggestion of such an attempt could damage a wife's security. Rumours alone could weaken her authority in the eyes of observers. For the mistress, the threat appeared in a different form. A new arrival could easily take her place within the private life of the lord. Favour, built on affection, rarely remained secure when a younger or more politically useful companion entered the scene. What had once been a quiet but influential relationship could disappear as attention shifted elsewhere. In this way, outside politics created danger for both women at the same time. Neither position guaranteed safety when powerful families began to maneuver for influence. The wife might face challenges to her legitimacy. The mistress might lose the personal closeness that sustained her influence. The great hall became the place where these pressures could be observed most clearly. Visitors watched carefully to see who spoke with the lord during gatherings. They noticed new faces appearing among the ladies of the household. They measured how the wife responded to these developments and whether the mistress still received the same quiet attention she once enjoyed. Every gesture became part of a larger political calculation. The household itself remained outwardly calm. Meals continued. Music filled the hall. Servants carried dishes through the familiar rhythm of evening gatherings. Yet beneath these ordinary scenes moved the ambitions of families who saw opportunity in instability. Alliances could shift. Reputations could be questioned. And relationships within the household could be reshaped by pressures that originated far beyond its walls. Both the wife and the mistress began to understand that the forces threatening them did not come only from within the household. External ambition could remove them both. Political pressure from rival families introduced dangers that neither woman could control alone. Replacement, new alliances, and carefully arranged introductions could threaten the positions of both wife and mistress at the same time. Such pressures slowly pushed both women toward a realization that rivalry between them might serve someone else's ambitions far more than their own. Tension inside the household had once seemed simple to observers. Many people believed the rivalry between wife and mistress explained everything they saw in the great hall. A glance across the room, a quiet conversation, or a slight change in attention could easily be interpreted as jealousy between two women connected to the same man. Over time, that explanation began to feel incomplete. Both women had lived long enough within the same environment to understand how fragile their positions could become. The pressures surrounding the household did not come only from personal relationships. Political ambition, family alliances, and the unpredictable behavior of powerful men constantly threatened the stability of their lives. These dangers slowly changed the meaning of rivalry. At first, jealousy had seemed unavoidable. The wife represented legitimacy and social order. The mistress embodied affection and emotional closeness. Their positions appeared to contradict one another in ways that naturally produced hostility. Yet the more clearly they observed the world around them, the more complicated that hostility became. Every gathering in the great hall revealed new risks. Visitors arrived carrying rumors from other estates. Advisors whispered about alliances that might reshape the household. Servants carried fragments of information from one corridor to another. Nothing remained private for long. In such an environment, survival required careful awareness rather than emotional reaction. Both women began to realize that open rivalry created opportunities for others to manipulate the situation. Those who wished to weaken the household could easily encourage jealousy between them, knowing that conflict would damage everyone involved. The wife began to see how public displays of anger threatened her dignity. The mistress began to recognize how easily hostility could justify her removal from the household. These realizations did not arrive through conversation. They emerged gradually through observation. The wife noticed that every argument or cold gesture between them became a subject of interest for guests and servants alike. What might have begun as personal resentment quickly transformed into a rumor spreading through the entire estate. The mistress noticed something similar. Hostility between them made it easier for outsiders to present alternatives to the lord of the household. A new companion could be introduced. Advisors could encourage distance between the two women. Rival families could exploit the tension to weaken the existing structure. Jealousy, once viewed as natural, began to appear dangerous. In such circumstances, maintaining dignity or influence required something more restrained than rivalry. Both women learned to measure their reactions carefully. Words spoken in anger could travel across the household within hours. Silence offered greater protection. Inside the great hall, this shift appeared subtle. Observers who once expected visible hostility began to notice something different. The wife no longer reacted openly to the mistress's presence. The mistress no longer attempted to provoke or challenge the authority represented by the wife. Their distance remained, but open confrontation slowly disappeared. For many guests, this calm seemed surprising. Rivalry had once seemed inevitable. Instead, a new atmosphere developed in which the two women maintained composure, even when circumstances might have encouraged conflict. Behind that composure lay practical reasoning. Both understood that dignity alone could not protect them. The wife possessed legal recognition, yet political maneuvering could still threaten her security. The mistress possessed personal closeness, yet new distractions could easily replace her. Neither position guaranteed safety. Recognizing this reality forced both women to reconsider the purpose of their rivalry. Continuing to fight each other served little benefit when larger forces already threatened them from every direction. Gradually, a different form of awareness took shape. Each woman began to see the other, not simply as an enemy, but as someone navigating the same uncertain structure. They occupied different roles, yet both depended on the stability of a household controlled by a man whose decisions could shift without warning. In such conditions, emotional battles began to lose their importance. Survival required restraint. Reputation required caution. Influence required patience. The great hall continued to function as the public center of the household. Guests still gathered beneath candlelight. Music and conversation filled the room. Servants moved through the crowd, carrying wine and food. Yet beneath these familiar rituals, the relationship between the two women had begun to change in a quiet but significant way. The hostility that once defined their encounters no longer dominated the atmosphere. Something quieter had taken its place. A silent recognition that survival mattered more than pride. Jealousy, once expected between them, gradually began to lose its importance in the face of larger dangers. Titles, affection, and reputation no longer offered reliable protection within a household surrounded by political pressure. In that quiet realization, cooperation began to appear not as betrayal, but as the only practical path forward. No announcement ever marked the moment when the relationship between the two women began to change. There were no witnesses to a private conversation, no written promise, and no formal agreement that could be recorded or remembered later. What emerged between them did not resemble a traditional alliance. It began with restraint. Inside a Tudor household, restraint carried powerful meaning. Every gathering in the great hall brought together people who observed each other closely. Advisors listened for weakness. Visitors watched for signs of tension. Servants moved quietly through the room, noticing details others believed remained hidden. Under such constant observation, conflict could become a weapon in someone else's hands. The wife understood this, first through experience. Public dignity formed the foundation of her authority. When she maintained calm composure during gatherings, guests interpreted the household as stable. When visible tension appeared, whispers followed quickly behind it. Every careless gesture risked becoming a rumor. The mistress faced a similar reality from a different direction. Her influence depended on continued presence within the household. If she appeared disruptive or disrespectful, critics could easily argue that she threatened the order of the estate. Both women, therefore, faced the same danger. Open hostility created opportunities for others to intervene. Gradually, a quiet pattern began to develop during gatherings in the great hall. The wife no longer allowed visible irritation to appear when the mistress entered the room. Her posture remained steady, her expression composed, as though the situation required no attention at all. This calm response changed the atmosphere immediately. Guests who once expected visible rivalry found nothing dramatic to observe. Conversations continued without interruption. Servants carried dishes between tables without pausing to listen for raised voices. At the same time, the mistress adopted a similar restraint. Rather than seeking attention or reacting to the wife's presence, she moved through the gathering with careful discretion. Her conversations remained polite. Her gestures avoided any hint of challenge. When the lord of the household spoke with her during the evening, the exchange appeared brief and respectful rather than provocative. This behavior reduced the tension others had once anticipated. Observers noticed the absence of confrontation more than they noticed its presence. Silence became the most important element of the arrangement. Neither woman spoke openly about the situation between them. Their cooperation existed entirely through what they chose not to do. No accusations passed between them in the hall. No cutting remarks reached the ears of visitors. No dramatic scenes unfolded during the gatherings that defined the public life of the household. This restraint protected both of them. The wife preserved her dignity by refusing to appear threatened. Her calm presence reinforced the legitimacy that the law had already granted her. Guests leaving the hall could only report that the household remained orderly. The mistress preserved her position by avoiding provocation. Her discretion made it difficult for critics to claim that she disrupted the household's stability. Without visible conflict, arguments against her presence became weaker. Over time, this mutual restraint developed into something resembling an understanding. The wife recognized that public humiliation of the mistress would only create a spectacle that damaged the entire household. The mistress recognized that open rivalry would invite intervention from advisors or relatives eager to remove her influence. Neither woman needed to speak these thoughts aloud. Their actions communicated them clearly enough. Another element quietly reinforced this arrangement: control of information. Tudor households functioned through networks of servants who carried news from one room to another. Rumours often travelled faster than formal messages. A single dramatic incident in the Great Hall could spread across neighbouring estates within days. By avoiding confrontation, both women limited the material from which such rumours could grow. Silence deprived gossip of its most powerful fuel. The household continued to operate with the same outward rhythm. Visitors arrived and departed. Meals filled the long tables beneath candlelight. Music and conversation drifted through the hall as they always had. Yet beneath that familiar routine existed a subtle shift. Two women who once appeared destined for rivalry had quietly begun to protect each other from the dangers of public conflict. Their arrangement remained fragile. Trust had not replaced caution, but a silent agreement had taken form through restraint and observation. Public confrontation slowly disappeared as both women learned that silence protected them better than rivalry. Preserving dignity in the Great Hall became more valuable than proving personal victory over one another. From that restraint emerged the first quiet signs that their relationship might evolve into something far more strategic. The quiet understanding between the two women did not appear as a dramatic transformation. No sudden friendship emerged, and no visible alliance formed in the public spaces of the household. What developed instead was something far more subtle, a gradual division of roles that allowed both of them to maintain influence without open conflict. The Great Hall continued to display the official structure of the household. Visitors who entered the chamber saw the same familiar arrangement. The lord of the estate sat in authority. The lawful wife remained beside him, greeting guests and presiding over the rituals of hospitality. Music drifted across the tables, while servants moved steadily through the room carrying wine and food. From the outside, nothing had changed. The wife still represented legitimacy. Her position remained the visible centre of the household's public identity. Every gathering reinforced this image. She welcomed visiting families, exchanged polite conversation with advisors, and ensured that ceremonies unfolded with proper dignity. The stability she presented reassured observers that the household remained ordered and respectable. This role required careful discipline. A noblewoman in Tudor society carried the responsibility of preserving appearances. The law and the church recognized her authority. Yet her daily actions determined how that authority was perceived by others. If she appeared insecure or hostile, the image of stability surrounding the household could weaken. Maintaining calm composure, therefore, became essential. Guests leaving the hall needed to remember an orderly household guided by a confident mistress of the estate. Her presence beside her husband signaled continuity and legitimacy, reinforcing the structure that supported inheritance and family alliances. While the wife maintained this public image, another form of influence continued quietly beyond the center of the hall. The mistress occupied a different territory. Her influence existed within the private emotional life of the man whose authority governed the household. Conversations that occurred in private chambers often shaped his decisions long before those decisions appeared in public gatherings. She understood the rhythms of his moods in ways others rarely could. Subtle changes in tone, hesitation in speech, or moments of frustration revealed patterns that outsiders might overlook. Through closeness and familiarity, she learned when his temper might rise and when his judgment might soften. This knowledge allowed her to guide his emotions carefully, where the wife represented order in public. The mistress often worked to calm or redirect the impulses that threatened that order in private. A moment of irritation that might lead to public humiliation could be softened through quiet conversation earlier in the evening. A reckless decision could be delayed through persuasion delivered in a more intimate setting. This arrangement developed slowly. Neither woman formally acknowledged the roles they occupied, yet both began to recognize the advantage of maintaining them. The wife preserved dignity in the public sphere, reinforcing the legitimacy that protected the household. The mistress managed the emotional currents that influenced the man whose authority shaped every decision. Together, these roles created an unexpected balance. The lord of the household remained convinced that his authority directed everything around him. In many ways, he still did. His word determined alliances, controlled property, and defined the structure of the estate. Yet the atmosphere surrounding his decisions was no longer shaped by him alone. The wife's composure in the great hall limited the spread of damaging rumors. The mistress's influence in private moments softened the impulses that might have created scandal. Each woman contributed differently to maintaining stability. Observers within the household began to notice subtle changes. Servants recognized that evenings in the hall rarely erupted into tension. Advisors observed that disputes are often resolved quietly before becoming public problems. Visitors sensed a calm discipline surrounding the household, even when circumstances outside it grew complicated. Few understood the quiet cooperation that helped maintain that calm. The two women did not share an open conversation about strategy. Their relationship remained defined by caution rather than trust. Yet each understood the importance of the role the other played. One protected the image of authority. The other influenced the emotions behind that authority. In this way, their rivalry gradually transformed into a form of quiet coordination. Neither abandoned her own interests. Yet both recognized that stability within the household benefited them more than open conflict. The great hall continued to glow beneath candlelight. Guests continued to admire the order of the estate. Servants continued their careful movements through the crowd. Behind those familiar scenes, however, two women had begun to shape the behavior of the most powerful man in the household without ever appearing to challenge him directly. Public authority remained firmly in the hands of the man who ruled the household. Yet two different forms of influence quietly surrounded his decisions. One woman preserved the image of order in the great hall, while the other guided the emotions that often disrupted it. Through this silent division of roles, a fragile balance began to take form inside the household. Information moved through a Tudor household in ways that rarely appeared in official records. Letters and formal messages carried one kind of news, but the daily life of the estate produced another kind entirely. Conversations overheard in corridors, glances exchanged during meals, and fragments of private discussion all travelled quietly through the house. Much of this movement depended on the people who passed unnoticed through every room. Servants. Among them, the maidservants occupied a particularly important position. They carried linens between chambers, delivered messages between rooms, and assisted both ladies and guests in private spaces where conversations often took place without restraint. Because of this constant movement, they heard far more than anyone intended them to hear. Inside the great hall, they moved through crowds carrying cups and plates, listening to voices that assumed they were invisible. In corridors, they passed advisors and visitors who spoke more freely once they believed they were beyond the attention of the household's central figures. Information is collected in small fragments. A careless remark during dinner, a visitor's quiet complaint, a rumour whispered between two guests near the doors of the hall. Each fragment might seem insignificant alone, yet when gathered together, they created a surprisingly clear picture of the tensions surrounding the household. Both the wife and the mistress understood the importance of this hidden network. The wife had long relied on servants to maintain the rhythm of domestic life. They reported which visitors had arrived, which rooms required preparation, and which members of the household required attention. Over time, she learned that servants also carried another form of knowledge, one that moved quietly through the estate. The mistress learned the same lesson through different experiences. Her position depended on awareness. Understanding the mood of the household often determined whether she could maintain influence or needed to act with greater caution. Maidservants who moved between chambers often carried subtle warnings about changes in behaviour or conversation. In this way, the servants became a bridge between different parts of the household. They rarely delivered messages directly about sensitive matters. Instead, they spoke through suggestion, tone, or simple observation. A comment about who had visited the estate that afternoon might reveal more than it appeared. A remark about a tense conversation in the hall could warn of developing problems. Gradually, both women began to recognize the value of guiding this flow of information rather than ignoring it. Rumors had always traveled quickly through noble households. When left uncontrolled, they could grow into stories that damaged reputations within days. A single misunderstanding repeated in the wrong context could alter how visitors viewed the entire household. By influencing the servants who carried information, both women could limit the spread of damaging gossip. The wife approached this quietly through the authority she already possessed. Servants responsible for attending the hall and private chambers naturally reported unusual behaviour to her. When tensions appeared, she could guide their interpretation of events simply through calm instruction. A misunderstanding might be described as an ordinary disagreement. A suspicious conversation might be dismissed as harmless speculation. These explanations encouraged servants to repeat a calmer version of events when speaking among themselves. The mistress worked differently, but with similar results, because she often interacted with servants in more informal moments. They sometimes felt comfortable sharing what they had heard elsewhere in the house. When she responded with discretion rather than alarm, the story lost some of its urgency. Rumours that might have exploded into a scandal instead faded into background conversation. Neither woman attempted to eliminate gossip. That would have been impossible. Instead, they learned to redirect it. A rumour that remained small rarely caused serious harm. A rumour that spreads uncontrollably could weaken both authority and reputation. By guiding the information circulating through the servants' network, they reduced the chance that private tensions would become a public spectacle. This quiet management required patience. Servants needed to believe that sharing information would not endanger them. Both women, therefore, avoided punishing small mistakes too harshly. Maintaining trust ensured that the network of quiet communication continued to function. Over time, the results became visible. Visitors entering the Great Hall noticed that rumours about the household rarely carried the dramatic tone found elsewhere. Conflicts that might have produced scandal in other estates remained strangely contained within these walls. The household appeared calm even when tension existed beneath the surface. Few outsiders understood the mechanism that allowed this stability. Behind the scenes, a network of maidservants carried fragments of information from room to room. Two women who once viewed each other only as rivals now quietly guided that flow, so that dangerous stories never gathered enough force to spread beyond the estate. Neither alliance nor friendship defined their relationship. Practical necessity did. Servants moving through corridors and chambers became the quiet channels through which information travelled across the household. Rumours that might have grown into a scandal were carefully redirected before they could explode. Through this hidden network, two women began protecting the same secrets without ever announcing their cooperation. Life inside a Tudor household depended heavily on appearances. What visitors saw during a feast or formal gathering was rarely the full truth. The Great Hall served as the most visible stage of noble life, a place where alliances, authority, and reputation were performed in full view of guests, relatives, and political observers. Every gesture carried meaning. Where someone stood during a banquet suggested their importance. Who received a greeting first? Who spoke during the conversation? And who remained silent all contributed to the carefully managed image of the household. In such a space, distance could speak as clearly as words. When the wife entered the great hall, her position appeared unmistakable. She moved with the authority granted by law and tradition, acknowledging guests, accepting formal courtesies, and overseeing the order of the household's public life. Servants watched her for instructions. Visitors bowed with visible respect. The structure seemed stable. The mistress, when present, occupied a different position. Her presence was often subtle, rarely announced with the same formality. She might stand among companions or relatives, participating in conversation without drawing too much direct attention. From the perspective of the guests gathered in the hall, the arrangement appeared simple. One woman represented legitimacy. The other existed somewhere at the edge of the scene. Observers assumed rivalry defined the relationship between them. Their eyes often searched for signs of hostility. A cold glance, a slight hesitation during greetings, a moment of tension that might confirm the quiet stories circulating through noble circles. Yet these expectations rarely produced the dramatic conflict outsiders hoped to witness. The wife maintained composure. Her attention focused on maintaining the dignity expected of her position. She spoke calmly, moved deliberately, and ensured the household appeared stable to every visitor who entered the hall. The mistress behaved with equal restraint. Rather than attempting to challenge the wife openly, she allowed the structure of the room to speak for itself. She avoided gestures that might provoke confrontation, choosing instead to observe the flow of conversation and the shifting mood of the gathering. To those watching from a distance, their separation appeared natural. It confirmed the story most guests already believed. Two women divided by position. Two figures exist in quiet tension. What remained invisible to the audience was the careful awareness each woman maintained of the other. Across the hall, a glance could communicate more than a spoken sentence. A small pause before greeting a guest could signal agreement about how the moment should unfold. A decision about where someone should sit during a feast could subtly shape the tone of the evening. These gestures were rarely dramatic. They did not resemble negotiation or formal cooperation. Instead, they looked like ordinary behavior inside a well-managed household. Yet behind this surface, calm existed a quiet form of strategy. The wife understood that public stability protected her authority. If visitors sensed chaos within the household, her position could weaken. Maintaining composure before the court ensured that the legal structure supporting her role remained unquestioned. The mistress understood something equally important. Her influence depended on proximity and trust. Any public confrontation could destroy the delicate balance that allowed her to remain near the center of power. Because of this shared understanding, both women benefited from keeping visible conflict to a minimum. Public distance protected the illusion of hierarchy. Private awareness allowed them to navigate the unpredictable behavior of the man whose authority shaped their lives. The Great Hall, therefore, became a carefully managed environment. Guests believed they were witnessing the natural order of a Tudor household. They saw a lawful wife maintaining dignity, while a lesser figure remained respectfully in the background. The story appeared simple, yet simplicity often hides careful design. Servants moving through the hall carried instructions that maintained this balance. Seating arrangements, timing of conversations, and the order of greetings all contributed to the appearance of calm order. Even small decisions could shape the evening's tone. When a conversation threatened to drift toward gossip, another topic appeared at the table. When a visitor attempted to provoke curiosity about private matters, attention shifted towards ceremony or hospitality. The result was a household that appeared remarkably stable despite the complicated relationships beneath its surface. Visitors rarely left the hall with evidence of scandal. Instead, they carried impressions of discipline, dignity, and carefully managed harmony. Few realized that this stability depended on two women who understood each other far better than the audience surrounding them imagined. Neither friendship nor trust defined their interaction. Practical awareness did. Each recognized that survival in a Tudor court demanded more than pride. Maintaining control over how others interpreted the household's dynamics could preserve both influence and safety. Over time, this shared discipline produced a subtle transformation. Power inside the household no longer flowed through a single visible figure. Instead, it moved quietly between roles, gestures, and carefully timed restraint. What appeared to be distance often concealed coordination. What appeared to be silence often carried agreement. And what appeared to be rivalry sometimes concealed something far more complicated. Public ceremonies in the Great Hall continued to present a distance between the two women, reinforcing the order expected by every watching eye. Behind that visible separation, careful calculation quietly guided how each moment unfolded. Power inside the household was beginning to move in a different direction, one that would soon matter most to the children whose futures depended on stability. Children stood at the quiet center of many decisions inside a Tudor household. Even when those decisions appeared to concern only adults, the stability of inheritance, reputation, and family alliances depended heavily on how the next generation would be protected and recognized. In a household where a wife and a mistress both existed near the same man, the presence of children made every situation far more delicate. The lawful wife carried the responsibility of protecting legitimate heirs. Her children represented the continuation of the family's name, property, and alliances. Every noble family expected the legitimate son to inherit land and titles without dispute. Daughters could strengthen political ties through marriage. But the son carried the future authority of the household. Because of this expectation, the wife's role involved constant vigilance. She ensured that servants respected the position of her children. Tutors were carefully selected, and their education reflected the status expected of future nobles. Even small gestures during public ceremonies mattered. Seating arrangements, greetings, and introductions quietly reinforced the legitimacy of the heirs. The household observed these signals closely. Visitors judged stability not only through the behavior of the adults, but also through the presence of children. When legitimate heirs appeared confident and respected, it suggested the family's authority remained secure. Yet the presence of a mistress could complicate this delicate balance. If a child was born outside marriage, the situation required careful handling. Such children could not automatically claim inheritance rights. Yet they still carried the blood of a powerful father. Ignoring them entirely could create resentment or rumors, while acknowledging them too openly might threaten the position of the legitimate heirs. The mistress understood this tension clearly. Her child depended on recognition rather than law. Without the protection of formal inheritance rights, the future of such a child relied heavily on the goodwill of the father and the overall stability of the household. In many cases, survival required subtle negotiation rather than confrontation. The wife's priority remained the protection of legitimate succession. Any uncertainty surrounding inheritance could weaken the entire family's political standing. Rival families might exploit disputes, claiming that internal conflict proved the household unstable. For that reason, the unnecessary scandal became dangerous. At the same time, the complete rejection of an illegitimate child could also create problems. A neglected child might grow resentful or become a tool used by political rivals seeking to embarrass the family. Rumors about cruelty or abandonment could damage the household's reputation. Because of these risks, both women sometimes found themselves navigating the same difficult question. How could the legitimate heirs remain protected while the existence of another child did not destabilize the family? The answer rarely appeared in formal agreements. Instead, it developed through quiet patterns of behavior inside the household. The legitimate children continued to receive the education and ceremonial recognition that confirmed their future inheritance. Their presence during gatherings reinforced their unquestioned status. Meanwhile, the illegitimate child might receive protection of a different kind. Such children were sometimes raised within the extended household or placed under the care of trusted servants or relatives. They might receive financial support, education, or positions that allowed them to live comfortably without threatening the legal structure of inheritance. This arrangement depended heavily on stability between the adults. If the household became chaotic, the position of every child grew uncertain. A father's sudden anger or political misfortune could remove support overnight. Rival families might use rumors about illegitimate children to question the authority of the lawful heirs. Both the wife and the mistress understood this fragile reality. Their personal rivalry mattered far less than the long-term survival of the children connected to them. Maintaining order within the household ensured that legitimate heirs could inherit without challenge, while other children could live without becoming sources of scandal. Because of this shared interest, restraint often became the most practical strategy. An open conflict between the two women would invite attention from outside observers. Every whisper could spread quickly through noble networks, reaching ears eager to exploit weakness. Protecting the children required preventing those whispers from growing louder. Quiet cooperation, therefore, served an important purpose. The wife maintained the dignity and authority necessary to secure an inheritance. The mistress ensured that any child outside marriage remained protected, without provoking disputes that could endanger the household. Neither woman gained absolute control, yet both could protect what mattered most to them. Over time, this delicate balance shaped the atmosphere of the household. Children grew within a structure that appeared stable to the outside world, even though it depended on careful restraint and constant awareness from the adults guiding it. In such an environment, survival depended less on dominance and more on patience. Maintaining order allowed the future generation to inherit a household that remained intact rather than fractured by rivalry. Children stood at the center of the fragile balance between wife and mistress, each child representing a different form of security and risk. Protecting inheritance while allowing recognition required quiet discipline from both women. Yet the greatest challenge was still ahead. Because controlling emotion inside a household filled with pride and resentment demanded a restraint few people could sustain for long. Life inside a Tudor household rarely allowed the luxury of open emotion. Pride, jealousy, resentment, and humiliation all existed beneath the surface of noble life. Yet expressing these feelings openly could cause consequences far beyond a personal argument. Public conflict threatened not only reputation, but also security, inheritance, and political alliances, for the wife and the mistress living within the same sphere of influence. Emotional restraint became a practical necessity. Disagreements between them could easily attract attention. A raised voice in the great hall, a harsh remark during a banquet, or a visible display of anger might travel quickly through the ears of servants and guests. In a court environment, where information moved rapidly through whispers, Even a brief confrontation could transform into a damaging rumor. Because of this constant observation, public arguments were rarely safe. The lawful wife carried the responsibility of protecting the dignity of the household. Her composure represented the stability of the family itself. If she appeared volatile or openly jealous, it could weaken the authority she held as the official partner within the marriage. Guests expected her to maintain discipline. Her silence during tense moments often communicated strength more effectively than any direct response. Calm gestures, controlled speech, and measured behavior allowed her to protect the public image of the household, even when private frustrations remained unresolved. The mistress faced a different but equally dangerous situation. Her position depended entirely on the favor of the powerful man who supported her. Any display of hostility toward the lawful wife could easily be interpreted as arrogance or disrespect. Such behavior might provoke anger from the man himself, who could respond by withdrawing his support or replacing her with someone else. For that reason, visible restraint became a form of protection. Avoiding confrontation did not necessarily mean the absence of emotion. Jealousy and frustration still existed, but they were carefully contained. The mistress learned to navigate social situations with caution, speaking politely and avoiding gestures that might be interpreted as a challenge. This quiet discipline served a larger purpose. When the two women avoided open conflict, they removed one of the most powerful tools the man could use to control them. Rivalry between them often allowed him to maintain dominance, encouraging competition while positioning himself as the figure whose favor determined the outcome. Public arguments strengthened that control. If jealousy erupted openly, the man could present himself as the authority forced to restore order. Punishment or withdrawal of favor could then appear justified, reinforcing his power over both women. Silence disrupted that pattern. When neither woman offered visible signs of conflict, the situation became less predictable. Without public drama to manipulate, the man's ability to maintain control through emotional rivalry weakened. Maintaining composure, therefore, became more than simple politeness. It was a deliberate strategy. Each woman learned to regulate her reactions carefully. Conversations remained calm even when tension lingered beneath the surface. Formal greetings continued with courtesy. During gatherings, they behaved as if the household operated in perfect harmony. Observers saw only order. Behind that appearance, however, both women practiced a difficult form of self-control. Pride had to be restrained. Insults sometimes remained unanswered. Personal frustrations were managed privately rather than expressed before an audience. This discipline required patience. Emotional restraint often demanded more strength than open confrontation. Anger offered a momentary release, but silence preserved long-term advantage. Each avoided argument prevented another opportunity for humiliation or punishment. Over time, this pattern reshaped the dynamics inside the household. Instead of feeding rivalry, the absence of public conflict reduced the influence of gossip. Servants carried fewer stories through corridors. Visitors left gatherings without witnessing a scandal. Political observers searching for weakness found little evidence of disorder. The household, therefore, appeared stable. This stability protected both women in different ways. The wife maintained the authority associated with her legal position, while the mistress preserved the favor that allowed her continued presence. Neither woman surrendered her pride entirely. Instead, pride was redirected into discipline. Emotional control became a quiet form of power, one that allowed them to survive in a system designed to exploit their rivalry. In such an environment, patience proved more valuable than confrontation. Every calm response denied the man an opportunity to divide them through anger. Every moment of restraint preserved the fragile balance that protected their interests. Restraint allowed both women to preserve dignity while denying the household the scandal many expected to witness. Controlling emotion in public gradually strengthened the quiet balance that protected their positions. A different danger, however, still lingered inside the household, one that could easily destroy the fragile understanding they had built. Stability inside a Tudor household rarely lasted without challenge. Even when tension between the lawful wife and the mistress settled into a cautious balance, other forces could still disturb that fragile arrangement. Courts were full of ambition, curiosity, and political calculation, and new figures constantly appeared, hoping to gain influence. A third presence could easily disrupt everything. One of the most common threats came in the form of a younger mistress. Youth carried a powerful influence in a court culture that valued novelty and admiration. A new woman entering the orbit of a powerful man could shift attention quickly, especially if she arrived, supported by friends, eager to advance their own ambitions. The lawful wife understood this danger clearly. If a younger rival captured the man's attention, the delicate balance inside the household could collapse. Jealousy might return, competition could intensify, and rumors would begin to circulate again among servants and visitors. The mistress recognized the same risk. Her position relied on closeness and familiarity rather than law. A new presence offering excitement or novelty could easily replace her place near the center of influence. Favor that had once seemed secure might disappear quietly, leaving her without protection. Because of this shared threat, the arrival of a new rival rarely remained a simple personal matter. It carried political consequences. A new mistress rarely appeared alone. Behind her often stood relatives, patrons, or ambitious figures hoping to extend their influence into the household. A family seeking advancement might encourage the connection, believing that proximity to power would strengthen their own standing. Through such arrangements, private relationships became tools of strategy. A rival family might attempt to place their daughter or relative near the man in hopes of gaining access to his decisions. Invitations, introductions, and carefully arranged meetings could slowly bring the new figure closer to the household. If successful, the consequences could spread quickly. The lawful wife might see her authority weakened as outsiders gained influence through private channels. The existing mistress might lose the familiarity that once allowed her to shape conversations or soften the man's temper. Beyond romantic rivalry, political advisors also posed a danger. Some counselors thrived on division. By encouraging suspicion or jealousy between the two women, they could increase their own importance. If conflict erupted, the advisor could position himself as the voice of reason, gaining the trust of the powerful man while guiding his decisions. The division created an opportunity. A quarrel between the wife and the mistress could produce rumors strong enough to destabilize the household. Those rumors might justify new alliances, new appointments, or even the removal of individuals considered inconvenient. Because of this, preserving stability required awareness not only of personal emotions, but also of external manipulation. Both women could recognize when new tensions appeared too quickly or too conveniently. A sudden introduction of a younger companion might not be accidental. Gossip that spreads too efficiently through the corridors could suggest someone actively encouraging conflict. A political advisor who constantly repeated warnings about betrayal might be attempting to provoke it. Recognizing these patterns allowed both women to respond with caution, instead of reacting with immediate anger or jealousy. Restraint often became the wiser response. Public composure prevented rivals from gaining the scandal they hoped to create. Silence could deny an ambitious advisor the dramatic confrontation he needed to justify his influence. The lawful wife retained her dignity by refusing to treat every new arrival as an open enemy. Her calm presence reminded observers that authority within the household still rested with her position. The mistress used a different form of influence. Familiarity with the man's habits and moods allowed her to soften tensions before they escalated. Conversations that might have encouraged suspicion could be redirected. Moments of irritation could be eased before outsiders turned them into opportunities for division. Through these quiet responses, the household could resist the influence of disruptive newcomers. This did not mean the threat disappeared completely. Ambitious families rarely abandoned their plans easily. Advisors continued searching for moments of weakness. New figures still appeared within the social circles surrounding the court. Yet, the absence of visible conflict reduced their ability to succeed. Without rivalry to exploit, their attempts at manipulation produced little effect. The household remained stable enough that outsiders struggled to justify interference. In such circumstances, the wife and the mistress did not need to trust one another completely. They only needed to recognize that certain dangers threatened both of them equally. A younger rival, an ambitious family, or a calculating advisor could destroy the fragile order, protecting their positions. Preventing that outcome required patience, discipline, and the willingness to avoid the dramatic confrontations others expected. What appeared to be the distance between them, therefore, concealed a shared objective: maintaining stability. As long as the household remained calm, both women retained influence in different ways. When stability endured, the ambitions of outsiders found little room to grow. The greatest danger inside the household was no longer the rivalry between two women, but the arrival of forces eager to turn that rivalry into chaos. Quiet discipline allowed them to prevent a third figure from gaining control over their fragile balance. Still, the changing tension inside the Great Hall would soon reveal something even more surprising to the watching court. Conflict inside a Tudor household rarely disappeared completely. What often changed was the direction in which that conflict moved. For a long time, observers believed the central tension of the household lay between the lawful wife and the mistress who lived under the same roof. Their positions seemed naturally opposed, and most visitors expected jealousy to erupt sooner or later. Yet the longer both women remained within the same sphere of influence, the more clearly another reality began to emerge. The greatest threats surrounding them did not always come from each other. The wife had once viewed the mistress as a direct danger to her authority. The presence of another woman near the center of power seemed to challenge the dignity of marriage and the stability of inheritance. Rumors that followed the mistress often threatened to stain the reputation of the entire household. At the same time, the mistress had once regarded the wife as the most obvious obstacle to survival. Law, tradition, and ceremony placed the wife at the center of legitimacy. No matter how strong personal affection might be, the mistress understood that her position remained fragile compared with the authority granted through marriage. For a time, this tension shaped every moment. Small gestures carried heavy meaning. A glance during a banquet, a delayed greeting, or a conversation that ended too quickly could be interpreted as evidence of rivalry. Servants watched carefully. Visitors waited for signs that the quiet hostility might finally erupt into open conflict. But as time passed, experience slowly altered these expectations. Both women observed the same patterns repeating themselves inside the household. A new advisor might attempt to provoke suspicion between them. A visiting family might encourage the introduction of a new companion for the powerful man. Gossip carried through the corridors often seemed designed to deepen division rather than describe reality. These repeated patterns began to reveal something important. The rivalry between them often served someone else's advantage. When jealousy erupted, the household became unstable. Arguments created stories that spread quickly beyond the walls of the estate. Political rivals gained evidence of weakness, while advisors gained influence by offering solutions to conflicts they had quietly encouraged. In such situations, neither woman benefited. The wife risked appearing incapable of maintaining order in her own household. The mistress risked losing favor if the conflict embarrassed the powerful man whose approval protected her position. Gradually, the direction of attention shifted. Instead of watching each other with constant suspicion, both women began observing the wider environment around them. Visitors, advisors, and ambitious relatives suddenly seemed more significant than the rival standing across the hall. A new pattern emerged. Tension no longer flowed directly between the two women. Instead, it moved outward toward those who attempted to manipulate their rivalry. This change rarely appeared dramatic. No public declaration announced that the hostility had ended. Guests entering the great hall still saw the same arrangement as before. The wife maintained her dignified position. The mistress remained present but restrained. Distance continued to define their visible relationship. Yet something subtle had changed. When a rumor attempted to provoke jealousy, the expected reaction sometimes failed to appear. When advisors hinted at betrayal, the conversation often dissolved into calm silence rather than anger. Observers searching for scandal found themselves disappointed. The great hall still contained tension, but it no longer followed the familiar pattern of rivalry. Instead of feeding the conflict as many expected, both women responded with caution that made manipulation far more difficult. In this way, the focus of conflict quietly moved elsewhere. Those who had hoped to gain an advantage by dividing the household began to face resistance they had not anticipated. Their attempts to provoke drama encountered a calm surface that refused to react in predictable ways. Visitors sensed the change even if they could not explain it. The household still appeared formal and disciplined. Yet the absence of visible hostility between the two women created a strange impression. Something about the balance of power felt different. It seemed as though an invisible line had shifted. The wife continued to represent legal authority. The mistress continued to hold personal influence. Yet, instead of pulling against each other, these two forces now moved in ways that prevented outsiders from exploiting their differences. This transformation surprised many observers. Courts were accustomed to rivalry. Stories of jealousy and betrayal provided entertainment as well as political opportunity. When those stories failed to appear, the atmosphere of the household became unexpectedly calm. Behind that calm stood a quiet recognition shared by both women. Their rivalry had never been the most dangerous force surrounding them. The true danger had always come from those eager to use that rivalry for their own ambitions. Understanding this changed everything. Once the focus of conflict moved away from personal jealousy, survival demanded a different strategy. Stability within the household became more valuable than emotional victory. This did not mean trust suddenly appeared between them. It meant that both women understood the same reality. Their futures depended on preventing others from controlling the tensions within the household. For a long time, the great hall had been expected to witness rivalry between the wife and the mistress. Yet the direction of conflict slowly began to move elsewhere. Observers searching for jealousy discovered a strange and deliberate calm instead. That calm would soon lead to something even more unexpected. As the court began to notice moments when both women appeared to stand in quiet alignment rather than opposition, ceremony held enormous importance in Tudor society. Rituals, banquets, and formal gatherings were not simply social occasions. They served as visible demonstrations of order, hierarchy, and authority. Every guest, our servant, and observer, entering a great hall expected to witness a household functioning according to clear rules. Position mattered. Where a person stood during a ceremony revealed their place within the structure of the family. Who greeted visitors first? Who remained seated during a formal announcement? And who stood beside the host, all communicated quiet messages about influence and legitimacy. Because of this, appearances could influence perception as strongly as official titles. The lawful wife traditionally occupied the most visible role during such events. Her presence symbolized continuity, inheritance, and lawful authority. When she stood beside her husband during public gatherings, the structure of the household appeared clear and secure. The mistress, when present, usually remained at a respectful distance. Custom and expectation placed limits on how visible she could be. Her presence often blended into the wider group of companions, relatives, or guests who surrounded the central figures of the household. This arrangement reinforced the hierarchy that everyone understood. Yet in certain households, where stability depended on a delicate balance, appearances began to evolve in subtle ways. Both the wife and the mistress gradually recognized that public behavior carried strategic value. The absence of visible hostility could influence how others interpreted the strength of the household. If guests sensed division, they might carry stories of weakness to rival families or political allies. If, however, the household appeared calm and disciplined, outside observers often assumed the internal structure remained secure. This understanding changed how the two women behaved during ceremonies. They did not suddenly become companions, nor did they abandon the social distance expected of them. Instead, they practiced a careful form of coordination that remained subtle enough to avoid provoking scandal. At formal gatherings, both women learned to control their expressions and gestures with precision. When entering the Great Hall, the wife maintained her traditional dignity, greeting visitors with calm authority. Her movements reflected the expectations placed upon her as the official partner within the marriage. The mistress, meanwhile, avoided gestures that could suggest rivalry or ambition. Her demeanor remained composed, respectful, and restrained. Observers searching for conflict often found none. More importantly, there were moments when both women appeared within the same ceremonial space without tension. They did not confront each other, nor did they display cold hostility. Instead, their calm behavior created an impression that the household functioned without disorder. These moments produced a powerful effect. Guests who had arrived expecting drama found themselves witnessing stability instead. Rumors of jealousy seemed exaggerated when compared with the quiet discipline visible in the Great Hall. Political observers noticed this carefully. Courts valued order above all else. A noble household capable of maintaining composure under scrutiny suggested strength and reliability. Allies preferred to associate with families that appeared disciplined rather than chaotic. Through these public appearances, the wife preserved her authority as the legal center of the household. The mistress preserved her presence without threatening the established hierarchy. Neither woman surrendered her position. Instead, they allowed the ceremony to reinforce a controlled image that benefited them both. Standing within the same ceremonial environment, without hostility, created a subtle message. The household remained stable, despite the unusual dynamics surrounding it. Servants also played an important role in maintaining this impression. Their movements guided the flow of ceremonies, ensuring that guests observed calm interactions rather than awkward encounters. Seating arrangements, introductions, and timing were carefully managed to prevent situations that might provoke tension. To outsiders, the result appeared effortless. The Great Hall functioned smoothly, as though every relationship within the household followed predictable rules. Visitors were rarely left with stories of scandal because there were few visible moments that suggested disorder. This visible calm discouraged interference. Rival families seeking opportunities to exploit conflict found little evidence that division existed. Political advisors, hoping to manipulate jealousy, discovered that the household presented a united surface difficult to disrupt. Over time, the discipline of these coordinated appearances strengthened the stability of the household itself. Public harmony created an environment in which rumors lost their power. When observers repeatedly witnessed calm behavior, their expectations of conflict gradually faded. The Great Hall, therefore, became more than a ceremonial space. It became a stage where stability was performed carefully, reinforcing a perception that protected everyone living within the household. What appeared to be simple etiquette often concealed deliberate restraint. Two women who once seemed destined for rivalry learned that visible composure could protect them both more effectively than confrontation ever could. Ceremonial appearances in the Great Hall slowly replaced expectations of rivalry with an image of quiet stability. Standing within the same space without hostility sent a powerful signal to every watching eye. Yet maintaining that stability required another strategy, one that would quietly limit the power of the man whose authority once controlled everything around them. Power inside a Tudor household often appeared absolute when viewed from the outside. The man who controlled land, wealth, and authority seemed to stand at the center of every decision. His commands shaped the behavior of servants, influenced alliances between families, and determined the fate of those living under his roof. Yet the reality of power was rarely that simple. Authority depended not only on commands but also on reputation, stability, and the flow of information moving through the household. Without these elements, even the most powerful man could find his influence quietly limited. Both the lawful wife and the mistress gradually understood this truth. Their positions remained vulnerable if the household became known for a scandal. Gossip spreading beyond the walls of the estate could damage political alliances and weaken the family's standing in court. When rumors grew too strong, even a powerful man could face pressure from relatives, advisors, or political rivals. Because of this, controlling scandal became a subtle but powerful form of influence. The wife had long protected the household's public dignity. Her composure during ceremonies and gatherings helped maintain the image of a stable family. When visitors arrived, they saw a household governed by discipline rather than chaos. That image protected the authority of the family itself. The mistress contributed differently. Her proximity to the private life of the powerful man allowed her to observe his moods and decisions closely. She could recognize moments when anger, pride, or impulsive behavior threatened to create unnecessary scandal. At such moments, calm conversation could redirect attention. By discouraging reckless actions or softening sudden frustrations, she helped prevent situations that might damage the household's reputation. These quiet interventions rarely appeared dramatic, yet they gradually reduced the frequency of public embarrassment. Over time, this pattern produced an important result. The household became known for stability rather than disorder. Visitors left gatherings without witnessing arguments or scandalous behavior. Servants carried fewer stories through the corridors of neighboring estates. Political observers saw a family capable of maintaining discipline even under pressure. This reputation strengthened the household's influence. Ironically, it also created a form of dependence. The powerful man at the center of the household benefited greatly from this stability. His authority appeared stronger because the environment around him remained calm and organized. Allies trusted him more easily when his household appeared controlled and dignified. Yet this stability did not arise from his commands alone. It depended heavily on the quiet discipline maintained by the two women surrounding him. They regulated social interactions, controlled emotional tensions, and prevented rumors from spreading. Their restraint created the atmosphere that allowed the household's authority to appear unquestioned. Without that stability, the situation could change quickly. If arguments erupted publicly or gossip spread uncontrollably, the reputation of the household could collapse. Political allies might distance themselves, while rivals would gain opportunities to challenge the family's influence. Because of this risk, the powerful man gradually became reliant on the calm environment they helped maintain. He might still hold formal authority, yet his reputation depended on conditions he did not entirely control. Stability inside the household became a resource that both women helped manage. Information played a crucial role in this process. In any large household, news traveled constantly through servants, relatives, and visitors. A careless remark during a banquet could reach neighboring estates within days. Rumors carried through kitchens and corridors often traveled faster than official messages. Managing this flow of information required attention. The wife ensured that formal events remained disciplined and orderly. By controlling the environment of ceremonies and gatherings, she reduced opportunities for scandal to emerge. The mistress observed the informal conversations surrounding private life. Her awareness of moods, gossip, and personal tensions allowed her to recognize dangerous rumors before they spread too widely. Together, these quiet forms of control shaped how information moved through the household. Stories that might damage the family's reputation rarely gained momentum. Conflicts remained contained rather than becoming a public spectacle. The result was a subtle transformation of influence. The man at the center of authority still held legal power, Yet the conditions that allowed that power to appear stable depended heavily on the discipline surrounding him. Both women, therefore, held a quiet form of leverage. By maintaining calm order, they strengthened the household's authority. By withdrawing that stability, they could expose the fragility of the structure, supporting his reputation. Such leverage rarely needed to be used openly. Its mere existence shaped behavior. Understanding that the household's stability depended on their restraint encouraged the powerful man to avoid unnecessary conflict. Decisions that might provoke scandal were reconsidered. Actions that could disrupt the balance of the household became less frequent. In this way, authority slowly changed character. What once appeared to be absolute control gradually became something more complicated. The visible figure of power remained the same. Yet the forces sustaining that power had shifted quietly. Behind the appearance of obedience existed careful influence. Two women who once seemed to compete for attention had learned that maintaining order could reshape the balance of authority inside the household. Stability inside the household gradually transformed into a quiet source of influence for the two women. Maintaining it, controlling scandal and information, slowly reduced the unpredictability of the man who once dominated every situation. Yet the fragile arrangement they created remained vulnerable, because alliances built without trust could fracture with a single whisper. Quiet alliances often appeared stable from a distance, yet their strength depended on conditions far more fragile than formal agreements. Inside a Tudor household, where relationships developed through necessity rather than trust, the cooperation between rivals carried risks that never fully disappeared. The understanding between the lawful wife and the mistress had grown slowly over time. Shared interests had encouraged restraint, and careful behavior had preserved the stability of the household. Observers who once expected open hostility had instead witnessed a calm surface that discouraged gossip and interference. Yet beneath that calm, uncertainty always remained. Unlike a formal treaty, the quiet arrangement between the two women had never been written or publicly declared. No witnesses confirmed its existence, and no promises guaranteed its continuation. Each woman understood the logic of cooperation, but neither could be entirely certain how long that logic would endure. The absence of trust created a constant tension. Both women recognized that their positions depended on circumstances that could change without warning. Favor could shift, political alliances could evolve, and personal emotions could influence decisions at unexpected moments. In such an environment, loyalty could never be assumed completely. The lawful wife still possessed the authority granted by marriage. Yet that authority relied on reputation and perception. If the household appeared unstable, relatives or advisors might intervene, claiming the situation required stronger control. The mistress faced an even greater vulnerability. Her influence depended entirely on proximity and favor. If the man at the center of the household suddenly withdrew support, her position could vanish overnight. In such circumstances, cooperation with the wife might seem less valuable than securing personal survival through other alliances. Because of this uncertainty, both women understood that the Silent Pact protecting them had limits. Their cooperation existed because it benefited them both. The moment those benefits disappeared, the arrangement could begin to weaken. A single opportunity might tempt one side to abandon restraint. If a scandal threatened the household, shifting blame onto the other woman could preserve personal reputation. If inheritance became uncertain, exposing secrets might strengthen the position of one family over another. These possibilities never disappeared entirely. Even when both women behaved with discipline, suspicion lingered quietly beneath the surface. Each gesture of cooperation carried the awareness that betrayal remained possible. Such awareness influenced their behavior. Conversations between them remained careful rather than intimate. Information shared was often limited to what was necessary to maintain stability. Personal secrets were rarely revealed completely, because knowledge itself could become a weapon if circumstances changed. The Silent Pact, therefore, resembled a balance rather than a friendship. Both women stood on opposite sides of a fragile arrangement, maintaining cooperation as long as it served their interests. Neither could afford to trust completely, yet both understood that open conflict would destroy the stability they had worked to preserve. Outside forces increased this tension. Servants, advisors, and visiting relatives constantly observed the household for signs of weakness. Rumours moved quickly through kitchens and corridors, often carrying exaggerated stories of rivalry or betrayal. In such an environment, even a small whisper could create dangerous consequences. A careless remark, overheard by the wrong servant, could travel through the household before either woman had the chance to respond. A visitor misinterpreting a glance or gesture might repeat the story elsewhere, turning suspicion into rumour. Once rumours began to circulate, controlling them became difficult. Political rivals often encouraged such whispers, knowing that uncertainty could damage the reputation of a household more effectively than confrontation. If observers believed cooperation between the two women had collapsed, they might assume the household itself had become unstable. This possibility made vigilance essential. Both women remained attentive to the atmosphere around them. Changes in behaviour among servants, unusual questions from visitors, or sudden shifts in gossip could signal that someone was attempting to disrupt the balance they had created. Responding to such dangers required patience. Immediate accusations or emotional reactions could strengthen the rumour rather than silence it. Instead, calm behaviour and careful observation often provided the most effective defence. Still, no strategy could eliminate the risk. The Silent Pact protecting the household remained vulnerable to human emotion, ambition, and misunderstanding. A moment of anger, a political opportunity, or a carefully planted rumour could unravel the fragile cooperation that had taken so long to establish. For this reason, both women lived with a constant awareness of uncertainty. Their alliance depended on discipline rather than affection, calculation rather than trust. Stability endured only as long as each believed the arrangement continued to serve her interests. The moment that belief weakened, the fragile balance could begin to fracture. The quiet alliance between wife and mistress preserved stability, yet it rested on cooperation without complete trust. Both understood that loyalty inside such an arrangement could shift suddenly if circumstances changed. Even so, the most surprising outcome of this fragile balance had not yet appeared, because the household was about to witness the moment when rivals seemed to stand together rather than apart. Alliances inside noble households often appeared firm when viewed from the outside. Guests attending ceremonies saw calm faces, measured greetings, and a household that seemed to function without visible disorder. Yet some alliances existed without signatures, without declarations, and without witnesses willing to confirm them. The understanding between the wife and the mistress belonged to that fragile category. Nothing about their cooperation had ever been written. No letter recorded its beginning. No priest or advisor had been asked to observe its formation. Even the servants moving through the corridors could not easily describe when the rivalry between them had first begun to soften. What existed between them was never announced. Instead, it developed through repeated moments of restraint. Each avoided actions that might destroy the fragile stability surrounding them. Each recognized that open conflict would damage the household more than silent discipline ever could. Because of this, their alliance remained invisible. Visitors entering the Great Hall still assumed rivalry defined their relationship. That assumption felt natural in a society where marriage and affection rarely occupied the same place. Guests expected jealousy to erupt sooner or later. The absence of conflict, therefore, appeared unusual. Still, the calm behaviour of both women rarely inspired suspicion strong enough to provoke investigation. Observers simply assumed that rivalry existed beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when pride would finally overpower restraint. Yet pride alone did not control their actions. Both women understood that their cooperation rested on practical necessity rather than emotional reconciliation. Neither had forgotten the circumstances that had once placed them in opposition. The wife still represented lawful authority within the household. The mistress still existed within the space created by personal favour rather than tradition. Those realities had not disappeared. What had changed was their understanding of the dangers surrounding them. Experience had revealed that their rivalry often benefited others more than it benefited them. Political advisors could strengthen their influence by encouraging division. Ambitious families could exploit scandal to advance their own interests. Even the powerful man at the centre of the household could maintain control by allowing jealousy to flourish. Recognizing this pattern altered their behaviour. The alliance between them, therefore, rested on shared interest rather than shared affection. Stability inside the household protected them both. Without that stability, every person living under the same roof would face greater uncertainty. Still, the nature of this alliance remained delicate, because no formal promise supported it. Either woman could withdraw from the arrangement at any moment. Circumstances might change. Favour could shift unexpectedly. A political opportunity might tempt one side to pursue advantage rather than cooperation. Such possibilities remained present at all times. The wife understood that exposing the mistress could strengthen her public authority if the household's reputation required a clear display of discipline. The mistress understood that revealing certain private truths could damage the lawful structure protecting the wife's position. These unspoken possibilities existed quietly within the alliance. Neither woman needed to mention them directly. Their awareness alone ensured that cooperation continued with caution. Each recognized that the other possessed the ability to disrupt the balance if circumstances demanded it. This knowledge created a peculiar form of restraint. Rather than weakening the alliance, the awareness of mutual vulnerability encouraged careful behavior. Neither side wished to provoke the other unnecessarily. Maintaining calm relations ensured that neither secret nor scandal would suddenly emerge to destabilize the household. The Great Hall, therefore, continued to display an atmosphere of composure. Guests observed polite greetings and disciplined conversation. Ceremonies unfolded according to established tradition. Servants carried out their duties within an environment that appeared calm and predictable. Behind that visible order stood an alliance sustained by calculation. No ceremony had celebrated its creation. No public declaration acknowledged its existence. Yet the balance it created influenced nearly every interaction inside the household. Even the powerful man at the center of authority gradually adapted to the environment surrounding him. Without visible rivalry to manipulate, many opportunities for control disappeared. Attempts to provoke jealousy often produced little response. The absence of dramatic conflict slowly transformed the atmosphere of the household into something more stable than outsiders expected. Still, the alliance remained vulnerable, because it relied entirely on shared interest. Its survival depended on circumstances remaining favourable to both women. Any event capable of shifting that balance could threaten the arrangement. A rumor, a political ambition, or a moment of emotional anger might weaken the restraint that held the alliance together. For now, however, discipline continued to preserve the fragile order they had built. The alliance between the wife and the mistress survived without documents, promises, or public acknowledgement. Their cooperation existed only because shared interest made stability more valuable than rivalry. Still, the quiet balance they created was beginning to influence the household in ways the watching court had not yet fully understood. Stability inside a Tudor household rarely appeared by accident. It emerged slowly from repeated choices made by the individuals living within it. When the rivalry between the lawful wife and the mistress no longer erupted into public conflict, the atmosphere of the household began to change in subtle but important ways. The first visible effect appeared in the absence of scandal. Noble households depended heavily on reputation. Rumours could travel rapidly through servants, visiting relatives, and political networks connecting distant estates. A single dramatic conflict could easily spread across the court. weakening alliances and encouraging rivals to question the strength of the family. When visible rivalry disappeared, that flow of rumor began to slow. Visitors attending ceremonies no longer witnessed tense confrontations or emotional displays. Conversations remained controlled, and gatherings followed predictable patterns of etiquette, without dramatic incidents to describe. Those who left the household carried fewer stories to repeat elsewhere. Silence replaced speculation. Servants still observed the daily life of the household. Yet the absence of open conflict limited what they could report. Instead of repeating tales of jealousy or argument, they described an environment that appeared disciplined and orderly. This calm reputation gradually influenced how outsiders perceived the family. Political allies felt more confident associating themselves with a household that appeared stable. In Tudor society, alliances depended heavily on trust in a family's ability to maintain internal order. A household filled with scandal could become a liability, discouraging cooperation from cautious partners. Stability, therefore, created practical advantages. When fewer rumors circulated, fewer political enemies found opportunities to interfere. Advisors who once thrived on conflict lost the chance to position themselves as mediators. Ambitious relatives searching for weakness struggled to justify their involvement. As gossip faded, political tension inside the household also began to decline. Without constant speculation about rivalry, the environment surrounding the powerful man at the center of the household became calmer. Decisions could be made without the distraction of emotional disputes dominating attention. This reduction in tension influenced daily life. Formal gatherings proceeded smoothly. Guests focused on the ceremony rather than the conflict. Servants carried out their duties without the constant expectation that arguments might erupt at any moment. The Great Hall, once anticipated as a stage for rivalry, instead became a place where order appeared reliable. Children benefited most clearly from this atmosphere. In noble families, the future of children depended heavily on the stability of the household surrounding them. Legitimate heirs required protection from disputes that could challenge their inheritance. Even rumors suggesting uncertainty about family unity could weaken their position. The absence of scandal protected that inheritance. When visitors observed a household functioning calmly, they saw no reason to question the legitimacy of the heirs. The wife's children continued to receive the respect expected of future leaders of the family. At the same time, other children connected to the household also gained protection. When tension remained controlled, the existence of children outside formal marriage did not automatically trigger destructive gossip. Their presence could be managed quietly within the structure of the household, without provoking a scandal that might damage everyone involved. In this way, the stability created by restraint extended beyond the two women themselves. It protected the next generation. Education, social introductions, and preparation for adulthood could continue without disruption. Tutors and relatives involved in raising the children no longer worried that a sudden scandal might interrupt those plans. This environment allowed long-term preparation to continue. Legitimate heirs could be trained for leadership, while other children connected to the household could be guided toward roles that ensured their security without threatening the family's legal structure. All of this depended on the calm surface maintained by the adults responsible for the household. The wife continued to represent lawful authority and family continuity. Her presence during ceremonies reinforced the legitimacy of inheritance and tradition. The mistress maintained the quiet influence that helped prevent sudden emotional disruptions. Her understanding of private tensions allowed moments of instability to be softened before they reached public attention. Together, their restraint produced a result few observers had expected. Instead of rivalry destabilizing the household, the absence of conflict strengthened its reputation. The very relationship once predicted to create scandal had become a factor supporting calm order. This stability did not erase the complexity of their situation. The silent pact between them remained delicate, supported by shared interest rather than deep trust. Yet its immediate effect could not be ignored. The household functioned with greater calm than many others surrounding it. Visitors noticed the discipline. Political observers recorded the absence of a scandal. Relatives recognized that the family's internal structure appeared secure. In the short term, this calm provided exactly what every noble household required most. Predictability. Predictability allowed alliances to remain intact, protected children from unnecessary danger, and discouraged outsiders from interfering in the private life of the family. The quiet understanding between the wife and the mistress produced an immediate result: a household that appeared stable, disciplined, and protected from scandal. This calm environment shielded the children and reduced political tension surrounding the family. Over time, however, the consequences of this fragile alliance would extend beyond simple stability, gradually altering how power itself was understood within the household. Over time, the quiet discipline maintained inside the household began to produce consequences that reached beyond immediate stability. What first appeared as a practical arrangement between two women slowly revealed a deeper transformation in how influence operated within the family. At first, observers interpreted the calm between the wife and the mistress as simple restraint. They assumed both women were merely avoiding scandal for the sake of reputation. In Tudor society, such behavior seemed predictable. Noble households often demanded composure from those living within them. Yet something more subtle had begun to emerge. The absence of rivalry gradually changed the expectations surrounding female relationships inside the household. Visitors who once anticipated jealousy instead encountered a carefully maintained balance. Servants who had once prepared for conflict found themselves describing an environment governed by discipline rather than hostility. This shift slowly altered perception. Women inside noble households had long been portrayed as competitors whose positions depended entirely on the favor of powerful men. Marriage created one form of authority, while affection created another. These two sources of influence were usually expected to collide. Instead, something different appeared. The wife and the mistress did not erase the differences between their positions. One still represented legal legitimacy, while the other relied on personal closeness. Yet their behavior demonstrated that these roles did not have to exist in constant conflict. By choosing restraint rather than rivalry, they quietly adjusted the balance surrounding them. This adjustment changed how authority functioned within the household. Traditionally, the structure of power seemed simple. The man at the center issued commands, while others reacted according to their position within the hierarchy. The lawful wife preserved the family's public dignity. The mistress occupied a space defined by personal favor. What emerged within this household complicated that structure. Influence began to flow through cooperation rather than confrontation. Stability created by careful behavior allowed both women to shape the environment around them. Their restraint limited opportunities for manipulation, while their discipline prevented the scandals that might weaken the household. In this way, authority no longer depended solely on formal titles. Instead, it depended increasingly on the ability to maintain order. The wife's legal position still mattered greatly. Her authority over inheritance, ceremony, and household management remained essential. Yet her effectiveness grew stronger when combined with the calm influence maintained by the mistress. Likewise, the mistress's proximity to private life gained greater significance when it supported stability rather than rivalry. Together, these roles created a system of influence more complex than outsiders expected. Neither woman needed to defeat the other to maintain her position. Instead, their combined restraint produced an environment that strengthened the household as a whole. Observers gradually recognized this change. Political advisors visiting the household noticed the absence of predictable conflict. Relatives seeking advantage through rumor discovered fewer opportunities to provoke scandal. Servants who once carried stories of jealousy instead described a household that appeared unusually composed. Such impressions altered how others interpreted female authority. Women were no longer seen solely as rivals competing for favor. They appeared capable of managing tension in ways that protected the broader interests of the household. This did not mean the social structure of Tudor society suddenly transformed. Marriage remained the primary source of legitimacy. Male authority still dominated legal and political systems. The roles available to women continued to be shaped by tradition and expectation. Yet, within those limitations, behavior could reshape influence. The wife demonstrated how lawful authority could be strengthened through restraint rather than confrontation. The mistress demonstrated how personal closeness could support stability rather than provoke scandal. Together, they revealed that influence could emerge from cooperation as well as competition. This realization carried lasting consequences. Future observers of the household began to understand that power did not always appear in obvious forms. Quiet discipline could influence events just as effectively as visible command. Stability could redirect authority in ways that formal titles alone could not achieve. In time, the story of the household became less about rivalry and more about balance. What had once seemed like a dangerous arrangement between two women had gradually evolved into a system that protected the family's reputation and stability. That transformation did not eliminate the fragility of their alliance. Trust remained limited, and circumstances could still change. Yet the quiet cooperation between them demonstrated something rarely acknowledged in discussions of Tudor power. Influence could grow from patience. Authority could emerge from restraint. And women living within rigid social structures could still adjust the order surrounding them through careful choices made over time. The quiet discipline maintained by the wife and the mistress slowly reshaped how influence operated inside the household. Their restraint demonstrated that authority could emerge from cooperation rather than rivalry. In the end, the great hall that once promised scandal would instead witness a far quieter revelation about where true conflict had always existed. The great hall had always been a place where people expected to witness conflict. Noble households across Tudor England often turned private rivalries into public spectacles. Guests arrived at feasts, not only to dine but also to observe subtle tensions, hoping to glimpse moments when pride or jealousy might break the calm surface of ceremony. For many observers, the presence of both a lawful wife and a mistress within the same household promised exactly that kind of drama. Visitors imagined raised voices behind closed doors, cold confrontations across the hall, and whispered insults that might ripple through the court for weeks. Servants moved quietly through the corridors carrying rumors that others were eager to hear. Stories of rivalry had become so common that people began to expect them automatically. Yet, the great hall of this household rarely delivered the spectacle outsiders hoped to witness. Guests attending ceremonies saw something far less dramatic. The wife entered with measured dignity, acknowledging visitors and maintaining the composure expected of her position. Her calm presence anchored the room, reinforcing the image of stability surrounding the household. The mistress appeared with equal restraint. She moved within the gathering without drawing unnecessary attention, greeting companions politely and avoiding gestures that might provoke suspicion. Her presence remained visible, yet never disruptive. Observers watching carefully often found themselves puzzled. The expected confrontation never arrived. Instead of dramatic tension, the hall seemed governed by quiet discipline. Conversations unfolded without interruption. Servants moved confidently between tables, and ceremonies proceeded with the same rhythm, repeated countless times in noble houses. To many guests, this calm felt almost disappointing. Some continued searching for signs of hidden hostility. A glance between the two women might be examined closely. A pause in conversation could inspire speculation. Yet these moments rarely confirmed the rivalry that observers hoped to witness. The atmosphere remained controlled. What those visitors could not fully understand was the transformation that had taken place long before they entered the hall. The wife and the mistress had once stood on opposite sides of a conflict that seemed inevitable. Their positions within the household naturally encouraged competition. One possessed the authority granted by marriage and law. The other held influence through personal closeness and private conversation. At first, rivalry had seemed unavoidable, yet experience slowly revealed a different reality. Jealousy between them often strengthened the authority of the man who stood at the center of the household. Political advisors used that rivalry to increase their own influence. Visiting families observed every argument, waiting for moments when weakness might appear. In such an environment, open conflict benefited almost everyone except the two women themselves. Recognizing this truth changed how they behaved. Instead of feeding the expectations of the court, they began to practice restraint. Each avoided gestures that might provoke confrontation. Each recognized that maintaining stability protected their own interests more effectively than dramatic displays of emotion. Their understanding remained unspoken. No declaration announced that hostility had ended. The distance between them continued to exist, preserving the appearance expected by society. Yet beneath that distance lived a quiet awareness shared by both. The real danger surrounding them had never been each other. It had always been the forces eager to exploit their rivalry. Inside the great hall, this realization shaped every gesture. When their eyes met across the room, neither displayed triumph nor resentment. Instead, they acknowledged a shared understanding that few others could recognize. Servants watching from the edges of the hall noticed the absence of conflict, though they rarely understood its meaning. Guests whispered about the strange calm surrounding the household, unsure whether it reflected discipline or hidden tension. Political observers sometimes suspected that something unusual existed beneath the surface. Yet without visible evidence of rivalry, their suspicions faded into uncertainty. The Great Hall, therefore, continued to display the same calm order year after year. Ceremonies unfolded, alliances strengthened, and visitors departed with impressions of a household that appeared remarkably stable despite the unusual dynamics within it. Children grew within that atmosphere of discipline. Legitimate heirs learned the responsibilities expected of them, while other children connected to the household found their place within its structure. The quiet cooperation between the adults surrounding them protected their future more effectively than open rivalry ever could have done. Over time, the story of the household changed in the memories of those who had observed it. Instead of remembering scandal, they remembered composure. Instead of recalling a dramatic confrontation, they described a family that seemed strangely resistant to the conflicts common in other noble houses. Few realized how deliberate that calm had been. Behind every ceremony stood two women who had learned that survival in Tudor society required more than pride or affection. It required patience, restraint, and a willingness to recognize where the true dangers lay. The Great Hall remained a place where people arrived expecting spectacle, but what they witnessed instead was something far quieter. Two women standing within the same world of power, aware that their rivalry had never been the real battlefield. The real struggle had always existed beyond them, beyond jealousy, beyond pride, in the ambitions of those who believed that conflict between women could be used to strengthen their own authority. And by refusing to provide that conflict, both women had quietly changed the balance of the household itself. Now, the candles in the great hall burn low, the echoes of ceremony fading into the stone walls that have witnessed so many silent calculations. The household rests in a calm that once seemed impossible, held together not by affection, but by careful understanding. So as the hall grows quiet and the long corridors settle into the night, it is time to leave this story where it belongs. May the silence of the Tudor Great Hall carry you gently into rest. May the whispers of history fade into soft shadows around you, and may you sleep well tonight, knowing that sometimes the most powerful alliances in history were the ones that no one ever saw.